Many parents have opted to educate their children in the home versus a public school system. But when it comes to the Evangelist or other Christian fundamentalists, stay tuned because I'm about to say something radical. So many parents, instead of using the public school system, are educating their children at home. There are certain requirements that have to be met, of course. The parent has to prove competent to be able to teach to begin with, and has to adhere to a curriculum that's dictated by the state, just like the state dictates the curriculum in the regular public school system. You can homeschool all the way through high school. However, many parents release their children to the secondary educational system in the public schools for largely social reasons, as most parents don't want to deprive their children of the high school experience. Many fundamentalist Christians will use this homeschooling for their children, and on many points I can't blame them. The United States is a first world country, but we severely lack in our educational standards in the public school arena. There have even been non-religious parents who send their children to parochial schools just to get a decent education, tolerating the religious instruction that comes with it. But what I'm going to say is going to be considered by many to be an attack on the First Amendment, and I'm going to explain why it's not. I do not believe the evangelicals and other Christian fundamentalists should be allowed to homeschool their children at all. And I'll tell you why, and it's very simple. They are forcing their beliefs of creationism on the children, in lieu of completely accepted science education that now exists in our modern world. And I'm going to use a book written by one of their own, titled Now How Shall We Live by Charles Colson and Nancy Pearcey, as my backing of why this right to homeschooling should be taken away specifically to the fundamentalists. This book was loaned to me by a once evangelist friend and really gave insight on the Christian fundamentalists' unrelenting battle against the basic standards of education, not only in America's public school system, but the entire world in general. Chapter 5 is titled Dave and Katie's Metaphysical Adventure. This was about the confrontation between a father and a daughter on their trip to Disneyland, and while exploring the Epcot Center and other scientific displays, and the father becoming greatly unsettled because the daughter seems to be rejecting the idea of creationism in lieu of what's being presented in the scientific venues before her, as well as in her school system. And the father is battling to tell the daughter that all the scientific education that she's had is largely false, overridden by their beliefs in Genesis and creationism. Colson, for many years, was one of the bullhorn voices of the evangelist movement. So this isn't some rogue who doesn't represent their community. And I know from decades of experience with evangelists and other fundamentalist Christians that this worldview is being indoctrinated on their children generationally. That's why so few can break away from this cult. Now, yes, they have to follow certain curriculum guided by the state regulations when homeschooling a child that must be met, or the state won't allow you to homeschool. But let's say they're following this curriculum in their, let's say, biological course. And the course is reviewing the hundreds of millions of years it took for life to develop to what it is today. They will check that block, complete the course, and immediately tell the child that they had to instruct on this topic, but to disregard it because it's not true. And then they will teach them the Bible and creationism as being the actual and correct avenue of how our world came to be. Now, it's going to be said that I can't prove this. Sure, I can. You find me any adult evangelist who was homeschooled, given proper education in the biological sciences to satisfy the state, and yet as an adult thinks man came to be because of Adam and Eve and Noah's Ark. So therefore we know they're doing it. And for that reason I think that right should be taken away. And I would say the same thing to any other community that was hampering their children's education outside of the fundamentalist churches as well. Now, the first seething remark the Christian fundamentalist is going to respond with is that I'm absolutely taking away their First Amendment right, if I were allowed to actually implement this. Your First Amendment right gives you the freedom to practice religion, as well as freedom of speech, press, and assembly. But that right does not extend to you doing harm to others. Seth Welch and Tatiana Fusari were charged with felony murder in the state of Michigan because their child, Mary, died from medical neglect because those parents' religious beliefs prohibited them from taking her to a doctor's office. The father tried to state that they are being persecuted because of their strong faith. Incorrect, they were not. Those charges resulted because he let his daughter die. And your freedom of religion does not extend to that extreme. That child was 10 months old. And now the fundamentalist is going to respond that homeschooling isn't murder, and I'm comparing an apple to a banana. No, but you are causing deliberate harm to your child because of your religious beliefs, and in my world, if I were running it, that would not be allowed. First of all, you're hurting his ability to become an educated human being, and instead indoctrinating fanaticism, which not only isn't provable, but has been completely proved incorrect by all the scientific genres and repeatedly and conclusively. That child may grow up and not become an engineer because he may not have an inclination to further study science, since you told him that the basics of science are invalid. That I would consider the neglect of a child, and I wish the federal government and every single state government would agree with me. You, Christian fundamentalist, are possibly limiting your child's choice of future professions that are based in rock-solid scientific foundation because you are brainwashing, and that is the term, brainwashing like a cult, that principles of scientific foundation are not valid. If a teacher found out upon the child reaching home that the parents were telling him that the earth was not round, but was flat, and telling the child to completely disregard the instruction in the classroom about our earth and the solar system, someone would probably be visiting the parent's home. But when the evangelist tells the child to disregard evolution and biological science, and worse yet is indoctrinating in the home out of the eyes of the public school system, it's allowed to go on in the name of religious freedom. And I'm saying it shouldn't be. Now, to a lesser extent, which isn't as much of an argument for taking away homeschooling, yet I feel does have some validity, is you are hurting the child in his social development. You, Christian fundamentalists, are going to make your child an outcast by teaching him these cult mantras. You are indoctrinating the child to a point where they are not going to be able to interact with anyone except members from their own cult. They will be limited in the future who their friends are, who they're going to be able to date, and who they're going to be able to marry. And this is why I have such contempt for the Christian fundamentalist. For you create a world, including in your homeschooling, in which the child will grow up and never be able to leave. So for these reasons, yes, I think we need to start considering the Christian fundamentalist or evangelical for what they are. And that is dangerous for the child. It's bad enough they're being indoctrinated by their church and all the other church activities and programming and youth groups that go along with it. I don't want the indoctrination to continue further in their schooling. And I hope the day comes when the fundamentalist privilege for homeschooling is flat out taken away from them. If you'd like to read a book on what I think the apocalypse will be like if Christ ever actually returned, check out my novel, The Second Fall, on Amazon. Link is in the video description in the banner, and I will see you next time as we take the sword of reason and reality and once again thrust it into the heart of ignorance.